For most of us, there's one set of laws. But what if there was another? For the Canadian Armed Forces, that's just reality. They operate under a completely separate justice system, a world with its own courts, its own rules, all designed for one single purpose: maintaining military discipline. So today, we're going to take a look inside.
So, how does this whole system actually work on the ground? Let's get out of the theory and jump into a real-world kind of scenario. Say a conflict breaks out between two soldiers. Who steps in to keep the peace and, deliver justice? Well, the answer, it's not as simple as you might think. All right, picture this. It's just a standard afternoon. Everyone's doing cleaning duties. All of a sudden, Corporal Smith gets in Master Corporal Bigger's face. He gives him a shove and yells, "That's the last time you steal from me." They get pulled apart, and a phone clatters to the floor. "That's my phone," Smith shouts. "He stole it." Okay, so what happens now?
Well, this is not something that just gets smoothed over with a, "Hey, you two, knock it off." A complaint has officially been made, which means the chain of command has to launch an investigation. The number one priority is to figure out exactly what happened, to get the facts straight.
So the first step is to investigate. And the military really has two main tracks here. For the really serious, sensitive, or complex stuff, especially anything that might be a criminal code offense, the military police take the lead. But for less serious breaches of discipline, it's handled right there internally with something called a Unit Disciplinary Investigation, or UDI. Right, so for this fight over the phone, the MPs are contacted, but they decide it's just not serious enough for them to take over. They actually recommend a UDI. And this is a really crucial first decision because it keeps the whole issue at the unit level. It's going to be dealt with as a disciplinary matter, not a criminal one.
Okay, so the investigation is done, and the file lands on the desk of the charge layer. Now, this is the person who's authorized to formally lay a charge, and they have to make what is probably the most critical decision of the whole process. What kind of case is this, really? And right here, this is the fundamental fork in the road. Is this a service infraction? A minor breach of military discipline, like being late for parade? Or is it a serious service offense that could be equivalent to a criminal charge, like theft? This one single decision changes everything that happens next.
So based on the investigation and some legal advice, the charge layer decides the evidence points to a service infraction. The official charge is something like, without permission or legal justification, takes property that belongs to another person. And that decision means this case is heading down a very specific path, this summary hearing.
Now look at just how different these two paths are. A court-martial, that's a formal criminal trial. The prosecution has to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt, which means the evidence has to be almost a sure thing. But a summary hearing, that's a disciplinary tool. The standard of proof is just a balance of probabilities. Basically, is it more likely than not that this happened? The consequences are night and day, too. One could lead to a criminal record and prison time. The other leads to what's called a disciplinary sanction.
So let's actually go into this summary hearing itself and see how the system is designed to be fair, even when you have a superior officer who's judging a subordinate. Because this isn't just a telling off in the boss's office. It's a quasi-judicial process with some very strict rules. And it's all built on this cornerstone of law called procedural fairness. At its core, it just means two things. One, you have the right to be heard, to tell your side of the story and answer the allegations. And two, the person making the decision absolutely has to be impartial.
And this is the question pretty much every civilian asks, right? Isn't this just the boss punishing an employee? How can an officer in your own chain of command really be an impartial judge over someone they work with every day? Well, the system has very specific safeguards to deal with exactly that. The system has a super strict test for bias. And here's the interesting part. It's not about proving the officer is actually biased. The real question is, would a reasonable person, looking in from the outside, think there's a real possibility of bias? Even just the slightest appearance of unfairness is enough to get an officer disqualified from a case.
And there are these specific categories of bias that can automatically get an officer kicked off a case. They include the things you'd expect, right? Like having a financial stake in the outcome or history of animosity. But there are also some that are a bit more subtle. So here's the crucial point. The connection doesn't have to be negative. Even a close positive friendship, like if you're regular camping buddies, that would be considered a conflict of interest. It creates what they call a reasonable apprehension of bias, and the officer would have to step aside. Period.
And this famous legal quote, man, it just perfectly illustrates the entire philosophy behind all of these rules. It's the bedrock of the whole principle. Fairness has to be obvious. Anyone looking in has to be able to see it. It's all about maintaining confidence and integrity in the system itself.
And to make sure this happens, the deciding officer can't just go with their gut. They have to follow this structured 5-step legal reasoning process for every single decision they make. It forces a logical, evidence-based approach, and, just as importantly, it makes their final decision transparent and reviewable. They have to show their work.
So, the hearing is held. The officer follows the whole process and makes a decision. What's the final outcome for Master Corporal Bigger? And maybe, just as important, what about Corporal Smith, the person who felt he was wronged?
If Master Corporal Bigger is found to have committed the infraction, the outcome is called a sanction. Now, that word is chosen very, very deliberately. It's not a punishment like in a criminal court. It's an administrative, disciplinary measure that's meant to correct behavior. It will not result in a criminal record, and, this is huge, detention cannot be imposed. And this right here is a massive evolution in the system. Historically, military justice was purely about the relationship between the state and the service member. But in 2019, a new law, Bill C-77, formally recognized the rights of victims inside that process for the first time.
So what does this mean for Corporal Smith? Well, as the person affected by the infraction, he now has guaranteed rights. He has the right to get information about the case, the right to have his views heard, the right to be protected from any intimidation, and the right to complain if he feels his rights have been denied. But look, these rights didn't just appear out of nowhere. They are part of a very long journey. You can see how the system has been constantly changing, right from when the Charter of Rights and Freedoms came in, all the way to that landmark Bill C-77 that brought in victims' rights. Every step is a response to court decisions and what society expects, pushing the system to be fairer and more transparent. So when you trace this one small case, really just a simple dispute between two members, it opens up this entire self-contained justice system. It's a system that's built specifically for the military context, but one that is constantly being measured against the standards of the civilian world.
And that leaves us with one final thought. This system has evolved like crazy, but that evolution, it's never really finished. The core challenge is always going to be there. How do you balance the absolute need for military discipline with the fundamental principles of justice that all of us as Canadians expect? How that balance is struck, well, that's what's going to keep shaping the system for years to come.